When I got this somewhat bizarre email saying, an interesting opportunity to work with big data, I think it said big data science and resilient systems, I was shocked that there was sort of someone who was thinking about trying to bring together people around these issues that I had spent time thinking about.
And it was such an appealing concept to really have 2 weeks of dedicated time to not only think about these problems, but to work with such a fantastic group of people. So that was pretty appealing. And frankly, yeah, that didn't hurt.
One of the defining features of this age is not just global climate change, but change in how we access information. And if we don't think about those together, we could create more vulnerabilities than we are without the data. But if we think of them wisely, we can potentially solve a lot of problems.
Because we have this massive amount of information, we can have the capacity of organizing in a way that people can respond better to change. We really have an opportunity.
I think that all of us want to leave this having produced something that really adds to this dialogue around resilience, but maybe to the broader dialogue about how some of these large, complex, seemingly intractable systems and intractable problems can be solved.
It's a great opportunity, but there's also kind of the dark side. There is big data all of a sudden being the sexiest job on earth. I mean, who would have thought when I graduated 15 years ago? What I see and what I see with some amount of concern is that this conversation is governed by people owning and selling toolkits. What I don't see is enough skill of actually making it useful and connecting the problems to the solution. In 2 or 3 years, if we don't solve that, there will be a disillusionment saying, oh, all that big data is useless. No, it isn't. It's not a false promise. It's just the delivery is not as good as it could be.
There is very much an excitement about the power of what can happen now. But to build and really maintain and sustain resilient systems, we need to think about beyond the here and now. So when I think about big data, I also think about the big data that's behind that. I mean, the climate world is sort of has a roots of big data because there's so much information about weather that we've stored. And the other side of that temporal scale in terms of making decisions about how we do it is that the sort of voices and values of people who aren't at the table right now and can't be because they're in the future need to be considered in that process. If we don't do that effectively, it will come back and be a problem for us in the future.
Far-ranging, deep diving, late running. We've had conversations in the lake. We've had conversations at 2 a.m. in the morning. We've had conversations over every meal. They haven't really stopped.
Is there anything that you want to say that I haven't asked you about?
The thing that I want to talk a little bit about, it's about the role of the media, which is more or less my sector. I speak about, we as a journalist, we know a lot about like how to create and touch people's heart in terms of narratives and kind of putting the important information first. Looking at the media as a part of this distribution system, of this adaptation system, it's really key. Kind of creating these narratives to adaptation, and there's a lot going on the media also on organizing data. So one of these key roles that media can play, in my opinion, is organizing data in a meaningful way for people.
When we talk about big data, we're talking about infrastructure, hardware, platforms that can make sense of big data, techniques, advanced computing, and so on. And how do we take this really advanced technical knowledge and connect them to the livelihoods of local communities where people don't talk about advanced computing. They don't talk about machine learning and neural networks and artificial intelligence and all that kind of stuff. So we have to find that interface.
I feel like some days the progress is slow and even, and then other days you'll have these moments of like, have we got anywhere? Did we hit a few walls? And then the next day, a gigantic conceptual leap and a set of new ideas will emerge. And in terms of the ones that really struck me during this experience, I think were the moments when we realized the importance of ethics. That we've been talking about a range of different things, but that if we took ethics out, all of the problems that we most feared would be present. And to realize that this concept of ethics had become so central, because it certainly wasn't what we came to Bellagio to think about, but it emerged over time as this thing where we suddenly went, that actually changes this term resilience. If we think about ethics and resilience, certainly changes the term big data.
Every problem that we're facing, as capital H humanity, every one of them involves a complex system. Everything that we could do that would help these systems, somebody else could do. That would harm these systems. And even some of the things we do intentionally, like with the good intentions, can harm these systems. So you have to be really careful when you're suggesting, change on large levels. And a lot of the things that we've been talking about this week have involved communities that are not our communities. And luckily, I think the conversation here is very aware of that. And there's no belief that we can parachute into somewhere and fix things, but instead, like, how do we understand these things well enough that as a whole, we can all make things slightly better.
What's at stake is really how we start thinking about the datafication of our world and how the flows of power and authority and autonomy are shifting. And then what are we going to do about that? Because I feel like there's only a pretty short window of time where we can have this discussion as a society before we're locked into systems that will be extremely hard to reverse. Some people believe we're already there, that we've got to a point now where it's too difficult to put the genie back in the bottle. I don't think so. I'm a little bit more optimistic than that. I think there's an enormous amount of good that we can do by asking these kinds of questions, by having these heady conversations, and then by creating